In Surah Baqarah, ayat number 260, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, He says, وَإِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ رَبِّي أَرِنِي كَيْفَ تُحْيِي الْمَوْتَى. And mention when Ibrahim said to his Lord, he says, my Lord, show me how you give life to the dead. So here Ibrahim alayhi salam, who is one of the Ulul Azm prophets, right? He's questioning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on something very fundamental, which is the day of judgment, right? And he's asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show him, right, how the dead are given life again. So Allah says, He says, Kala awalam tu'min. Do you not believe? It's a very interesting question, right? When you have a prophet of that stature, right? And he's questioning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's saying, show me how you bring the dead to life. And Allah turns around and says, do you not believe in me, right? So Ibrahim alayhi salam replied, he says, Kala bala walakin liyatma'inna qalbi. He says that, yes, I believe. Of course I believe. Bala, right? That's a confirmation statement, right? But he says, but only that my heart would be satisfied. Now, you run into this type of scenario in a lot of times, right? And this is part of our, lecture series or Jummah Khutbahs, however you want to call it, is the last 4 lectures, 3, and this is plus 1, 4. I've been focusing on the idea of emotional intelligence. And the question arises that when you have emotions, right, you have your emotions that you have inside of you, and you also have emotions when you deal with other people. So a lot of times people come to you and say, I care for you a lot, right? When it comes to husband and wife, right? Or somebody comes in and says, I really care for you a lot. I love you, right? Like my brother, and so on and so forth, right? And the question becomes like, do you believe, right? The opposite party says, my words are not enough, right? When I say believe in me, right? But then here Ibrahim alayhi salam says that my heart, I believe. Of course I believe what you tell me. Ya Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I believe in what you tell me, but my heart is not satisfied. So when you look at it, you have the prophet who's one of the greatest prophets of all time, the father of monotheism, right, who logically arrived at the answer that there is only one God. You have the story in the Quran, right, where he talks about how he arrived at the concept of one God, and then he logically talks to his people, right? But yet when it came down to the belief, he says, of course I believe, but my heart is something else. And that's been the topic of our conversation, right? And today what I'm going to tell you is try to bring this whole thing to a closure. Maybe we have enough time to talk about it, right? And bring the whole topic to a closure, right? The idea is that we have been created as one of the best creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. So we have been created this best creation where Allah is really proud of us, right? And He sent us in this state into this dunya, into this world. And why are we sent here? Allazi khalaqal mauta wal hayata liyabluwakum ayyukum ahsanu amala. So to test who amongst you is the best of deeds, your amal, right? Your actions. We are in this test, right? But the test is actually of your actions. Now, when you talk about intellect, right, Nabi Ibrahim was already there intellectually, right? He already knew what Allah was, right? So there was no problem with the intellect part, the knowledge part. But the problem was what? That his heart was still not satisfied, right? When somebody says, I care for you, right? I love you, whatever it is, right? When they tell you those things, right, intellectually, logically, you say, yes, I'm understanding. But then the heart is something else, right? The heart needs something else. And that comes with actually your actions. And Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam, salawat, puts it very beautifully. He says that the knowledge is more than an intellectual understanding. It must progress from your mind to your heart. but then it must manifest in terms of your actions. So if your knowledge is just sitting in your brain and your heart is not satisfied, then you're not going to do anything with conviction. That faith is not going to come. And that's been the topic of our discussion last 3-4 weeks, where we're talking about logic. Your intellect is the CEO of your faculties of your emotion. Emotions are your anger, for example, your desire, your creativity, or waham, or doubt, however you want to define it, right? But the intellect is what is supposed to guide these emotions in the right manner, where it takes you on the right journey, right? And this has been the topic of our discussion. When we talked about it last time, we said that the human is personally capable of, with his actions, rising above the angels. As long as what? As long as his intellect is governing his emotions. And he's also capable of going below the beast, right? When he lets the intellect go and his emotions govern his actions. Imam Ali says this very beautifully. He says that your emotions are like the wild beast, right? And if you don't tame the wild beast inside of you, the wild beast will end up taming you. And this is the state of confusion or chaos, right? Where you enter into a state of ignorance, where the emotions take over your being, your nerves, and you do things that you actually regret. And so far we have talked about anger, we have talked about desire, we talked about doubt, suspicion, or waham, right? And we inshallah will focus on the intellect to a certain bit, right? Now, the chaos that comes, right, when your emotions take over, what happens, right? You enter into a state of indecision, and you end up doing things that you don't want to do, or you don't do things that you should be doing. The world bears down on you because you end up doing things that are not conducive to your nature, right? And if you look at it, I'm going to go backwards, right? So we'll talk a little bit about the last time where we talked about wahm or doubt, where there are 3 levels, right? The guy who doesn't have any suspicion, right, or any doubt on somebody's action, that person's called a person who has no insight. They take everybody for face value, so they are very easily duped by somebody. Then you have what is called as the excessive level of wahm, which is called doubt or suspicion, where you doubt everybody's actions no matter what is going on, and that other person might have anything for you or might not have anything to you, but you doubt everything around you, to the point where you are oppressing the person in front of you, and you're also oppressing yourself. And that you live in this fantastical, created, imaginary world where you're questioning everything and everybody. Now, I didn't finish this last time, but I wanted to finish this in terms of the moderate level of doubt or suspicion, right? The moderate level of wahm is actually called being just or having justice. Being just to yourself and doing justice with others, right? Imam Ali says that justice is where you put your thoughts and your actions into the right place. And that is the moderate level of wahm, right? Then we talked about the time before, we talked about desire. When you don't have any desire, you don't have any goal in life. You don't want to do anything, right? You pretty much become a lazy person because you don't want to strive for anything in this dunya. On the other hand, you have the excessive level, right, where your desires are at that point where they overcome you, where you stoop to a level even below your dignity, where you're willing to let go of your dignity, right? That's the excessive level of desire, right? And desire is not only in terms of relationships between a man and a woman, but it's worldly things too, right? Where you stoop to going after this worldly things in a manner where you're selling your soul out. And then the first lecture I talked about, and then the middle part, so in the desire part, the middle part is called modesty, right? Where you have the middle path. And this is what Islam keeps talking about, right? When it comes to wahm, the moderate part. Islam doesn't say give up your emotions. Islam doesn't say don't have any emotions, because there's a lot of religions which say, desire, don't have any desire, or desire is the root cause of sorrow. Give up the world completely, right? Islam doesn't subscribe to that. The third part was anger. When you don't have any anger or deficient anger, what happens? You basically become a coward, right? Where anybody and everybody can come walk right over you, where you don't stand up even for your own rights, let alone other people's rights. And then you have the excessive anger, and excessive anger can lead to where you can cause harm to yourself or others in that state of anger, whether it's through your words, whether it's through your actions, whether you say something to somebody, whether you do something to somebody, whether you say something to somebody, all in that fit of rage, right? And then until your intellect comes over and you calm down, and that's where you kind of start looking at things differently. But in the meantime, these emotions have come run over, and they become the CEO of your company, driving you towards actions that don't really drive or gain you any benefit. The middle level of anger is what comes from that is called courage. Courage to stand up for justice. So far we have learned kind of 3 lessons from the last 3-4 lectures. One is justice when it comes to creativity. The other is bravery, right? Courage to stand up for justice when it comes to anger. And having modesty, right? In between path, right? Where you are controlling your desires, where everything is in the middle. And these are the 3, jewels or 3 lessons that we can learn from the emotions. So, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So, let's talk about intellect, right? The first level of intellect is where you don't have any intellect at all. It's called the state of jahiliyat or ignorance. And ignorance can be of 2 types, right? The first is where it's called simple ignorance. Simple ignorance means I don't know about certain topic, and I know I don't know about it, and I don't claim to know about it. For example, I'm not a brain surgeon. Right? I cannot perform brain surgery, which is perfectly fine. I know it, and that's fine, and I don't even want to talk about it. But the second one is the one where the problems come, right? Where it's called the compound ignorance. Compound ignorance comes from a person who actually doesn't know, but he doesn't know that he doesn't know. So this type of person is somebody who will never admit that he's wrong. He always has to have his last word in. They like the sound of their voice, and they think they are experts on everything. And you may have experts sitting in front of you, yet they want to talk and teach this person as if they are the expert and want to get their last word in. That's called compound ignorance. And by the way, that is a sign of a narcissistic person or somebody who's got an ego. So that part is very much a problem, right? Because what happens is that, a lot of times, Imam Ali says there is a lot of barakah in when you say, I don't know. When you say, I don't know, because what it does is it forces you actually to go look it up, right? Or it forces you to actually go understand what is going on when, instead of saying, I don't know, right? So, and the next one is the one where you have the excessive intelligence. Now somebody say, well, having being extra intellect is actually a good thing. Actually, it's not a good thing, right? Because at some point, right, that intellect will actually become a hindrance to your belief in your faith, right? If I say I care for somebody, right? If I say I love somebody, right? It has to transcend beyond my words. It has to come from a belief of the heart where the emotions are coming out, and that translates into actions. Because that's where Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq says that, the knowledge is actually, more than an intellectual understanding, right? And it must progress from the mind to the heart, and then from your heart, it should manifest into actions. And that's where I was talking about the story of Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam, right? So what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do? That's what I started my lecture with, right? Because what did Nabi Ibrahim ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? He says, show me how you bring the dead to life, right? And Allah asked him what? What did he say? He says, do you not believe? Right? Nabi Ibrahim, he's asking Allah subhanahu, he's questioning him. But what did Nabi Ibrahim say? Yes, of course I believe, right? But it has something to do with the satisfaction of my heart. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have entered into a full proper debate with Nabi Ibrahim, right? And said, by the way, the genes, of this bird is like, one cell, and I multiply this cell, and by the way, it's got the code in it, and all this stuff is dispersed, and I bring all this stuff together, right? What did Allah do? He didn't engage into an intellectual conversation. You know what he did do? He says, let's show you by action. He said, do what? He says, go get 4 birds. He says, now cut them up, mix up their meat, go take the meat on 4 different mountains, put them there, and then call them. Now, interestingly enough, he's making Nabi Ibrahim do the action. So if Nabi Ibrahim can do the action, can Allah do the same action? Of course he can, right? He can kill the birds, but he's making Nabi Ibrahim do the action. And he made him do the actions, and he says, call the birds to you. And what happened? All the birds, formed back again, and they came flying right back to him. Now, this is called amal in action. Right? That's where when we say in Surah Asr, what do we say? إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَامِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. It's not only about your belief, your iman, your faith. It has to go from your intellect to your heart, where you believe with conviction. And once you believe with conviction, it comes into actions. And that's really where the test is. The test is into your actions. And the actions come from what? For husila mafis sudur. On the day of judgment, Allah is going to open your heart and look at what was in your heart when you were doing those actions. And that's what's described as amelus salihat. Now, I didn't give you the middle path here, right? So this is where the answer comes in, right? We recite in Surah Jummah all the time, right? What do we say? Yatlu alayhim ayatihi وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةِ. Right? So first is purification of the heart. And knowledge. The knowledge is the actual light of the intellect. That's what Rasulullah says. To strengthen your intellect, you need to put knowledge in it. But once you have the knowledge, you have to have it with the combination of your intellect being the CEO of your emotions, governing your emotions, using justice, using moderation, using bravery and courage, right, to guide your emotions to conviction. And then when you drive your emotions to conviction using the governance of the knowledge in your mind, and the conviction in your heart, then it manifests into actions, which is what Allah loves. And by the way, this is a recipe for success, not only in the afterlife, but this is a recipe for success in this dunya also. If you use your intellect with your knowledge and use it with wisdom, when should I speak? When should I not speak? When should I exercise my emotion? When should I not exercise my emotion? When should I have desire? When should I not have desire? When should I get angry? When I should not get angry? When should I question somebody? When should I not question somebody? All that comes with the wisdom. And that intellect gets strengthened with your knowledge. And if you use your knowledge to strengthen your intellect, then you get basira or wisdom. And that wisdom is what will guide you to exercise your emotions. So we as human beings are created two things. There's it's your intellect and your emotions. And that's where Imam Ali says that, when you let your intellect govern your emotions, your actions make you rise above the angels. And that's what Allah was proud about, where He said, everybody bow down. But then He turns around and says that, by the way, the people who don't use their intellect, guess what? They are worse than the wild beast animals. And that's the lesson that we need to learn from this, 4 lectures that I've been trying to complete this whole picture around emotional intelligence, is to try to come and bring this whole thing into one complete picture. And that's where the story of Nabi Ibrahim comes into play, that once you have your intellect governing your emotions, your actions drive you to success in this world and drive you to success in the Akhirah. Now, bringing this to a conclusion part is the fact that we need to understand that we have emotions. And we need to use our intellect to guide our emotions. But you need to know what triggers your emotions. And you have to do that self-reflection inside of you to know what are the triggers that trigger my emotion. And you have to put yourself in a situation where you create this self-recognition of what triggers them. And then you have to create an accountability in yourself to how to control these emotions. Because ultimately, right, I talked about Allah creating you, and this life is a test, but who's the final examiner for the test? It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment. And on the day of judgment, right, it is a meeting, right? And you're going to go meet Him, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I created you as the best of my creations, and I made all the angels bow down to you. And I put these faculties inside of you. And what did you do with your life? And if our answer is that we didn't prepare for it, right, and we showed up, living our life like a wild beast, what do you think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to look at you and say that day? On the other hand, if we say that we used our intellect to guide our emotions with our knowledge and our wisdom, and we drove our actions to where they are, better than the actions of the angels, what will Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? And that's all I want to end you with. And the best examples for that are the martyrs of Karbala. They exhibited exemplary amount of courage to stand up for justice. You can see the level of modesty that they had inside their actions. You could see the wisdom in their actions. Today, after 1400 years, we can see the wisdom of the actions of Imam Hussain and the martyrs of Karbala.